Greetings, friends. You are on the Military Reports channel, and today we will discuss with you the situation in Ukraine on the 5th of June, 2024 year. A lot of things have happened today, so let's get started. And we will start with you from the Kharkiv direction, where we received very interesting information, to be more precise. A very interesting report. You can find it in the public domain on the Telegram Northwind. According to the information that is publicly available, allegedly this channel Northwind has a direct relationship directly to the grouping of the troops of the North. Perhaps this is their official page. A very short report on what happened in the last 24 hours. Let's study it in detail. There are a lot of interesting points there, yes. The first thing we pay attention to is that fierce fighting continues in the village of Volchansk in the Molchansk direction. The APU has increased the number of counterattacks and is trying to regain lost positions. The intrepid assault groups are engaged in fierce battles on the territory of the aggregate plant and have occupied several buildings. If we return with you to the map of Volchansk, then we are directly talking about this Volchansk aggregate plant. It is not clear which specific buildings were taken by the units of the Russian troops, but in general, such information was not received from the official channel. In the east of the city, the intrepid have gained a foothold on the dominant heights and fully control the road from the quiet NP. Here is a quiet locality. Here is most likely a road. Most likely, we are talking about a given, let's say, career. Here is some kind of quarry. Some heights are most likely here, and most likely this road is controlled. And the APU does not have the ability to transfer units, reinforcements, say, from the east closer to the central part of northern Volchansk. At the same time, this information confirms that Tikhaya is most likely under the full and tight control of the units of the armed forces of Ukraine. However, these are not the most important points. Let's read on. In general, the overall advance of Russian troops in the Volchansk direction amounted to up to 500 meters. That is, taking into account the aggregate, it is an aggregate plant, perhaps a citadel, perhaps a central part. There is a relatively calm in the Lipsovsky direction. In the forest, a unit of the 1004th Separate Security and Maintenance Battalion is being transferred from Kiev. Over the past day and went. What is interesting here? Here in principle is a description of the general situation. The most interesting part begins in the last part, right here. In July of this year, NATO countries will gather in Washington to finally decide what to do with Ukraine. Until that time, the Kiev regime of Ukraine will try to conduct marking a major offensive operation. To show Western curators the need to receive an invitation from Ukraine to the alliance. And with a high degree of probability, this operation will be carried out here, in the Kharkiv region. The APU believes that the command of the APU took into account all the mistakes of last year's failure. And a hastily assembled brigade of madmen caught on the streets will bring success. This information has not been received from the official channel. And in general, how would we do it? We have already talked about this with you many times, we have discussed it many times. And in general, it is worth noting that literally every day Russian channels, Russian units, Russian, possibly special forces, publish footage of a large number of, say, equipment. Please note with the insignia of the North Group of troops, that more and more tanks and equipment are being transferred to the Belgorod direction, to the Kharkiv direction. We receive such shots with you every day. Literally, if we update the map from the 1st of June, then yesterday another footage of the transfer of equipment to the side, let's say in the Kharkiv region, in Belgorod, was published. All of these, as it were, railway tracks are indicated so relatively, but there is no specific delegated binding. Where it is transferred, that is, plus or minus somewhere in this area, perhaps even somewhere not here, but in general. It is always about the fact that units are being transferred here, to the Kharkiv direction. We have highlighted a lot of interesting information directly from this report of the North Group of Forces. However, I believe that, a small mistake has been made here. It is noted here that this is the question, in order to show Western curators the need to receive an invitation from Ukraine to the alliance. I think there is another question for the NATO leadership here. And first of all, there is a question that does it even make sense to continue a special military operation? After all, it's not a question of, let's say, investing money or not investing money in medicines for immortality from this. You don't know if it's worth investing billions of dollars here. If we talk about the project, as Ukraine is called, let's say, from the Russian side, as the relationship between the NATO countries, the United States and Ukraine is called, then it is very easy to check whether there is any sense in further investing in Ukraine. To do this, you just need to assemble a small group of, let's say, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70,000 groups there. Pump up this group with Western weapons, and not old there, let's say, some kind of backward. It became a technique like the first Leopards, yes, but with serious tanks, serious aircraft, including in the 16th. To charge this group with a large number of, say, NATO officers, such as French, for example, about whom we have repeatedly said that it is already present on the line of contact, to allow, let's say, Ukrainians to use air defense in order to beat up aviation over the territory of the Russian Federation. Allow the use of Musa attacks deep into the rear of the units of the Russian Federation in order to hit warehouses and so on, at officer headquarters there. Allow Patriots to be used to shoot down helicopter planes and, of course, allow the use of cruise missiles, such as Storm Shadow, some such as Scalp, and after that, to send an offensive to such a charged group and see how it all ends. And if it ends once again, it ends with the same failure that we saw in the 23rd year in the district of Don, in the area of Malaya Tokmachka, in the area of Verbova. Then, of course, Western countries are wondering if there is any point in continuing further if the old Western. If nothing happened with the Soviet, old Ukrainian weapons themselves, they gave the old Western weapons. It didn't work out. Now they give more or less modern. A combination of very modern weapons and more or less new weapons. And if nothing works out now, but it will work out if Ukrainians are given lasers and plasma there, and if they give something else there. I don't know, in this case it is unlikely to work out. If it didn't work out here, then why would it turn out to be the most modern weapon? All the more reason to cook. And this is the version, this is the theory, that is now going on in everyday life. And in general, this also explains to us why the units of the Russian army suddenly stopped abruptly. Why the offensive of the village of Lipsy stopped developing. Why are the Volchansk fighting still going on? Why are bridges along the Volchi River being destroyed if, say, the creation of a sanitary buffer zone involves entering the depth of the Apu's defense, and there is an entrance there to that Kupyanskaya direction from the rear? And so on and so forth. In general, now everything is becoming clear that initially the Russian leadership, the Russian command, clearly understood about Ukraine's plans to launch a possible offensive of such a demonstration. Somewhere for 3 or 4 weeks before the summit in Washington, which will take place somewhere in early July, to show some results. To get out, maybe even get out there at the distance of an short artillery strike on the settlement of Belgorod. Try to show or take a more confident, strong negotiating position before the upcoming negotiations. After all, even if NATO refuses to do something there for the AFU, then of course, before any negotiation processes, of course, Ukraine, Zelensky, has a desire to come to these negotiations with a strong position. And there can be only one strong position in this case. This is an exit directly to the suburbs and outskirts of the settlement of Belgorod, and, in fact, the beginning of open terror. And in the event of an open terror, perhaps the Russian leadership will make some concessions in the possible upcoming negotiations. That is, in a word, if we all emphasize with you, draw some conclusions, then definitely. If such an offensive is carried out by the armed forces of Ukraine, by NATO, then this is only one thing, it's all in. All in by NATO, all in with the sides of Ukraine, and there, come what may, it is possible. The main thing is to get into a fight, and then come what may. In these frames, for example, we can observe with you the movement of Ukrainian units that are moving from south to north in southern Volchansk in order to transfer additional reinforcements. Additional supplies by the Ukrainian unit, which are located in the northern part near the aggregate plant and in the citadel area. In other words, this is the story. Siersky himself recently gathered a large group of friends. Siersky and other friends, and the Magyar, about whom rumors were spreading that he was destroyed during another strike by Iskander. Then something, but the brigade commander of the 13th Brigade Charter was alive. Everyone has gathered here and is talking about how hard it is, how difficult it is, but in general, we can also note that a group is really gathering in the Kharkiv region, which is definitely too much to simply repel Russian attacks. Too big a group just for defense. It is too big, and even compared to that with the grouping on the part of the Russian army, which is used for this operation. And as I will summarize once again, it seems to me that one of the main goals of the Russian offensive in the Kharkiv region was to create this sanitary zone in order to meet the advanced attacking orders of the armed forces of Ukraine. Not on the territory of the Russian Federation, not on the territory of Novaya Tolstanka, not on the territory of Shebekin, not on the territory of Voznesenivka, not on the territory of Oktyabrski, and on the territory of Gluboko. Volchansk the Elder. That is, here to meet the first blow, here to dig in as much as possible, here to spend a month of fighting, so that the SSU will thin out their offensive potential as much as possible. And even if they manage to reach the same settlements of the Russian Federation, it will, of course, be a completely different army from Ukraine, which can lose a lot of blood in a month in this direction. But we also do not forget that the Russian units are also preparing a large number of surprises from their side. The news feeds are already full of news about the use of the new Russian howitzer 150mm 152 Malva, which uses a completely different technology with a chassis, not a caterpillar, wheeled. Also, we do not forget that more and more posts are being received that in the near future, Russian units will begin to use the 3000 FABs. That is, of course, it's a completely different game, a completely different story. And of course, also for the second half of the 24th year, it is promised, and is increasingly being discussed, about the use of the Su-57th. In other words, it is possible that the latest Western weapons of the armed forces of Ukraine will not quite help to cope with this list of weapons that we have just discussed with you. And among other things, of course, the good old weapons, which have demonstrated themselves at their best since the beginning of the 2022 year, will also be present on the battlefield. What were you waiting for? We are moving with you to the North Cup direction. There is a lot of news for Kupyansk today. And probably the most important news is the catastrophic losses among the personnel of the armed forces of Ukraine over the past day. According to the data of the Ministry of Defense, you lost 545 personnel in, let's say, the Kupyansk direction. Official data of the ministry's summary. It's your own business to trust these figures or not, but if you just take some kind of vector of reflection, a vector of direction according to the numbers, then this is the greatest indicator. And the first formation of the entire Kupyansk direction, 545 people, almost 2 battalions. 4 individual branches of the armed forces, this is 2 battalions of losses only in the last day. But in general, there is geolocation confirmation of this. For example, here are published footage of assault operations in the area of Sinkivka. The armed forces of the Russian Federation are storming the Apu landings, and for this purpose, so far only 1 Beha, with a small number of personnel, is used in this direction. There is a processing of positions, the entrance, let's say, to the trenches, the landing of troops, and the beginning of the cleaning of the defensive lines themselves. In other words, this video confirms the control of at least part of the forest belt, attempts to further bypass the southeast stock, Sinkivka, and exit to Petropavlevsk. Artillery strikes are being carried out on Stepovaya Novoselka with the use of various types of weapons. In other words, preparations are still underway here before the offensive, although it is possible that the offensive itself is also already underway. The most interesting news, of course, comes to us in the flywheel style. Every day we receive more and more news, and today we can summarize the news, posts from reliable, unreliable sources. Pro-Ukrainian, Russian, neutral. Then approximately now we can conclude that Russian units control the style of the strike. Along this entire red line, information about the offensive from Berestov has been repeatedly received, so far without geolocation, without confirmation, without updating various maps. There is one video from Novoselovsky, published highly as the work of drones in beer by dropping grenades on the advancing Russian units, which in turn moved along the Novoselovka-Stilmakovka line. All that week, we discussed with you about the advance of the Russian army along the Kalyamyshki-Myasozharovka line. Some cartographers have already painted Myasozharovka into the territory controlled by Russian units. Today, it is also reported that the Russian army, in order to, say, protect the flanks, is developing an offensive further in the direction of Rozovka or Andriivka, and also this locality, even more of it has come under the control of Russian units. Artillery strikes are regularly carried out on the very same Stilomakovka, including with the use of, say, helicopters, guided and unguided missiles. In these frames, another temporary deployment point was destroyed with the use of missiles or anti-tank weapons. In general, the flywheel style is ready for the start of assault operations, and in general. Once again, just to summarize where we started. Extremely high losses of the VSO have been noted in this direction over the past day. It is most likely in connection with the fighting in the area of the settlement of Stilomakovka. Then we are moving with you to the South Kupyansk direction. Here without any changes. There are several interesting shots in the Serebryankovsky-Seversky direction here. The 54th Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine published footage of an attempted assault along the Verkhnykamianka-Zolotaye-Verkhnykamianskaya river line. They fought back more precisely from the 54th 118th Brigade or 180 Battalion. 54th. The 2nd Mechanized Battalion, together with the 118th Brigade of the Territorial Defense Brigade, repelled the next roll of Russian units along this line. While it is difficult to say it was possible to recapture, it was not possible. The footage was published from the side in the USU, but we can say for sure that the extreme geolocation, which was, let's say, captured, is a visit to this stronghold, and an attempt to sweep by Russian units. It is not yet clear whether this offensive was successful. Whether it was successful or not, then we have only what we have. Of the interesting things, it is worth noting today the footage, the information that came from the area of the settlement of Razdalovka. I think everyone knows for you, let's say, the cartographers of the General Staff, SOFA, updated their map today, and shows that the advance of the 51st Guards Parachute Regiment is what you see on the map. So far, geolocations confirming this promotion have not been published. Perhaps they have some kind of insider among the soldiers of the 51st Guards Parachute Regiment. But if we summarize, and, let's say, trust this post, then according to this publication, at the moment, Russian units approximately control this situation around Razdalovka. Of course, this is, let's say, supernatural progress. It is obvious that if this information is confirmed, then the armed forces of Ukraine in the area of Razdalovka have got into a very, very problematic situation. Definitely, the locality is already in a semicircle. With such success, the 51st Regiment can also move further to the west in the direction of the settlement of Fedorovka-Bereznaya, and, in fact, surround Razdalovka. That is, if this information is confirmed in this control, then there is no need to wait months or years for the split to fall. In the coming days, for sure, the settlement will not withstand the onslaught, and the APU will be forced to roll back to the north. Then the direction of Seversk. That is, we expect, if this happens, it will first of all be an exit to the operational expanse, and, in fact, the assault on Seversk itself has already begun, since there is just a series of settlements flowing one after another: Razdalovka, Bereznaya, Fedorovka, then Kuzminovka, Svinovka, Svyatopokrovskaya, after Svyatopokrovsky already Seversk itself. Fighting is possible from the southern direction. It will begin very, very soon. In the bright direction, there are no changes in the eastern direction. At least, no news published about any changes. But if you follow the summary of the Ministry of Defense, then, according to the information, the main fighting today was conducted along the line of Orkhov, Vasiliev, Kamenkovka, Perevely, Zalesnyanskaya, Vasyukovka. In other words, there were very active Russian units here somewhere. Basically, this activity has so far been limited to inflicting fire damage, but perhaps it was the beginning of artillery preparation before something more powerful and larger. We are waiting for more information, more details. By the very hour, several shots of the work of the Russian Su-25th Assault Aviation on the Eastern Channel were published in YAR. Russian drones are working with drops, discounts on the opposition of the armed forces of Ukraine in high-rise buildings. Artillery strikes are being carried out on the central part of the Yar clock. Artillery bombs arrive, some warehouses may explode. We see a secondary detonation. Work is underway with drones. There are mutual strikes on Kalinovka, on one part of Kalinovka, on the other. After all, serious assault operations are being conducted here, and one side is trying to gain a foothold. The Russian side is trying to do everything in its power to prevent the consolidation of Russian units. So it throws countless reinforcements in order to prevent this situation. What have you been waiting for? We are moving with you to the Avdiivka direction. There's not much news here. There is a consolidation around the Falcon. Perhaps the storming of the Falcon itself is already underway. It's just that while the operation is being kept in some big secret, assaults are underway along the Solovyev-Sokol line. Assaults are underway along the Novo-Alexandrovka, the same Sokol. Assault actions are underway, including in the direction of Oshiratina-Novo-Alexandrovka. But no news has been received about the self-updating of the map. Only individual cartographers show full control over the Novo-Alexandrovka road 426th kilometer. That is, if we summarize all the news, then we can observe approximately the same picture with you at the moment. In other words, the Russian units control the territory somehow today, but without any serious changes on the map. Well, then we are moving with you to Kesnobradovka. Footage was published from the side of the Viso, an attempt to storm from the side. On the Russian side, the destruction of a Russian tank with the use of javelin. And somewhere here this situation was happening. That is, the assault and the attempt to storm took place this way in Yasnobradovka. But in any case, despite the destroyed damaged tank, Yasnobradovka did not remain for long. It is extremely difficult to defend here, but there is only one way, one opportunity, an approach from the side of Karlovka. And from a very narrow isthmus, which is under full fire control from Russian units. What have we been waiting for? We are moving to Georgiivka, and today several cartographers announced right at the same time that Georgiivka, according to the information received, has come under the full control of a division of the Russian Federation. In other words, if we update the map with you, summarize all the news that we have received over the past day, then at the moment this picture is observed in this direction. So far, there has been no geolocation confirming this control. We are waiting, of course, we are waiting. But maybe that's what happened. Because we have repeatedly drawn attention to the fact that the latest news that came from Georgiivka is dated the 17th of May. A lot of time has already passed. Almost 3 weeks have passed since that news. For sure, they didn't go to each other's barbecue there for 3 weeks. Most likely, something serious was going on. It was just that the operation was kept as secret as possible by both one and the other side in order not to escalate the situation, not to inflate expectations. And now, as of the 5th of June, the first information about full control began to arrive. If this is so, then the Russian operational space is open to the Russian units and further movement is underway. Already, in fact, the battle for Kurakov. After the fall of Georgiivka, this is definitely a battle for the big last extremely strong point in this direction strategically. This is Kurakova. What have we been waiting for? We are moving with you to Konstantinovka Novomikhailivka. Let me remind you that yesterday we discussed the attempt of the Russian side's offensive, the complete capture of Paraskovevka, the capture of Victory south of, say, the forest belts south of Victory, the advance along the Sokolvodyan line. Today we were waiting for additional news, but there was no additional news. Only, let's say, adjustments of maps of various cartographers. Pro-Ukrainian, neutral, pro-Russian. But in general, everyone agrees that yes, it really happened. Yes, there was a breakthrough, and the only question that tormented everyone was whether the Russian units succeeded. We also raised it yesterday, whether the Russian units managed to enter the southeastern part of Konstantinovka, gain a foothold on farms. It was the big one who was bothering everyone. It wasn't, it happened, it didn't happen. There was no geolocation. There was no geolocation, but today, let's say, officials and not ours, let's say, who are already known, perhaps by military hundreds, to the 79th Brigade, could not resist and, of course, commented on the situation both on Roskoveka and Konstantinovka. We will not count the upper part of the post, it is very rough, but there is something to say about the south. As a result, Paraskovevka is occupied. The armed forces of the Russian Federation gained a foothold on the outskirts of Konstantinovka and began to form a semicircle, forming an impressive gray zone. That's it. That's the story. The 79th Brigade confirms that Russian units have entered Konstantinovka. That's it. The battle began very quickly, much faster than butting heads with Novomykhailovka, and in general. Now we see that somewhere in the southern part of, say, Konstantinovka, we are now seeing this picture with you. There is a half-ring obtained from the farms, from the Paraskovevka side. We also see the intention of the Russian units to enter the second semicircle, along the Pobeda line, and then the Oporniki fields. That is, they strive for approximately such a picture. And this, of course, is already a disaster, or a disaster. A catastrophe, since Konstantinovka is cut off as much as possible from both Vodian, and Ugledar is cut off from the whole world. But after a very long pause, footage of Fabs arriving in the southwestern part flew again along Ugledar. Most likely, attempts will be made here from the first assault actions. And perhaps the battle for Ugledar is just around the corner. Perhaps after Konstantinovka, or after the physical cutting of the route and the expansion of the control zone, but again very soon. Then we are moving with you for a time, a tactical bridgehead. There's no news here. A few tosses, a few fabs. Everything is fine within the framework of a simple regular military routine. There may be more serious assault operations underway, but we are not aware of them. According to the work direction of a similar story, even if in general it's just the arrival of toss again, it will have to be sunny. Maybe already. And by the way, it is also important to note that in addition to the same Hollyhocks, in addition to the 3000th, and in addition to the 157th, we certainly do not forget that very, very soon the Russian army will begin to use TOS the third Dragons, which have undergone a serious modernization based on the results of the use of this type of weapons in a special military operations, have reduced the number of missiles, increased some there. Barbecues were also installed from drones, and, most importantly, they increased the distance, the strike range to 15 kilometers. Also, most likely, the Dragons will be used in the Kharkiv direction in the event of offensive actions by the AFU. And the most unexpected news, the most unexpected update comes to us from the Kherson direction, from where we did not expect. So it is from here. And what happened? Today, the AFU unit publishes footage of the movement of Russian paratroopers, Marines, most likely, in the village of Dacha, along the Dnieper River, directly opposite Kherson itself. We see units of Russian soldiers moving in the direction and falling under the influence of grenades, bombs from the side of the drones. In the beer of the Kherson units of the High. This action took place exactly in the area of this building, claiming in the video that it was fresh, the 2nd of June. In other words, based on this information, it can be concluded that during, say, the fighting over the past months, Russian units managed to at least reach here, possibly completely, and Dachas, and the entire coast opposite Kherson, is under full control of Russian units. Perhaps the map does not correspond to reality at all. Perhaps the bridgehead is much wider, larger, and more substantial. In other words, this is the kind of story that happened, and it also means something. There is an extremely high probability that if you really risk launching an offensive in the Kharkov-Belgorod direction, then the best, of course, from the point of view of some military thinking, a springboard for the offensive, will be an extremely remote point from the original offensive, the height of Kherson. And here in general, of course, it will not be an offensive with the aim of reaching Odessa or Nikolaev. However, it is obvious to create a point of tension that will force the APU to return its units back. And, most likely, based on the focus that we are currently observing from the Russian units, there is an extremely high probability that the landing of a possible Russian landing will go along the Kizomys-Valentolinskaya-Dniprovskaya line. It is along this coast that Russian units will try to create something like a market, but only on, let's say, the Ukrainian side of the Dnieper River. And there will already be butting. In principle, this is a very convenient springboard for defense. There is no way to attack or counterattack in the USU. Here everything is basically shot through, viewed. There is no woodland. And how about in the Crimea region, where, let's say, the units of the Russian army held the main defense? And here everything will be in general, if Russian units take control of the entire coast and land like this. then it will be extremely difficult to counterattack here, as if in USU. And in general, in light infantry with anti-tanks, let's say, under the cover of artillery, under the cover of drones. Russian units can stay on this small fist of land for a long time, carry out rotations calmly, perhaps, well, as if to force the main part of the units back. And in general, as if there could be a very unpleasant story here, and to some extent, it is even possible to create a springboard on the part of the Russian army for further advancement to the same Kherson and Mykolaiv. Anything can happen, and it can be extremely unpleasant for Zelensky himself, including. If we talk about political news in Ukraine, then everyone on the internet bypasses the frames. At least the authors of this video claim that on the border between Ukraine and Romania, the first Ukrainians began to be blown up by mines, most likely a clearing on the pedals according to these frames. Most likely this is the result of the pedals' work, as they are trying to leave the territory of Ukraine. But the entire border has already been mined. And now the first explosions of Ukrainians have begun, trying to escape from this terror, from this bloody nightmare, but, as we see with you, no one on the territory of Ukraine will bear absolutely no responsibility for this. And in general, a person will not get to the front, but he will not be able to avoid it. And perhaps he may stay there forever after bleeding. If we talk about Ukraine, very important news is coming from the US Embassy today. The US Embassy urges all Ukrainians, all US citizens, or rather, those with dual citizenship, not to go to the territory of Ukraine under any pretext. And if you are on the territory of Ukraine, there is at least dual citizenship, then in no case do not go out in public places, but immediately contact the US Embassy in order to set up some kind of the possibility of secret export of people's data at the embassy. Then, through secret diplomatic channels, all these people with dual citizenship will be removed from the territory of Ukraine, the territory of the United States. This is all happening against the background of the fact that a law was passed today that, including people with dual citizenship, are subject to mobilization, and in the near future, there will be a lot of such, say, us Ukrainian citizens. And they can all certainly get in, and this is no longer hiding in Ukraine itself. So they are trying to minimize risks and losses as much as possible. And on the eve of the companies, probably, us citizens did not want to see how Ukraine mobilizes us citizens and sends them to the front. This would be extremely frustrating, so trying to get around. But why Ukraine behaves like this with its Western partners, the United States, is also difficult to understand. There is a large number of us citizens here, and now this story is happening. According to European news, it is important to note that preparations are underway on the part of NATO countries. They are being built. While they are still working on logistics, there is still a lot of work to be done. But let's say that officially the German Defense Minister Germany says that we, Germany, should be ready for war with Russia by the year 2029. In other words, in 5 years, logistics will be built so that an unlimited number of units can be transferred to the border with Belarus and Ukraine without hindrance, and then conduct some kind of military operations. At the same time, it is noted that, let's say, NATO exercises in the Baltic Sea and exercises of Ukraine along the border with Belarus of tank mechanized units are being held. Let me remind you that a few weeks ago there was news that Gomel,